Wonderful. We're happy to have you, Anne. So now we're going to take a minute to talk a little bit about your book, which is called Finding Your Superpowers, a guide for people on the autism spectrum and their allies. And we are going to watch a short video clip where you share about your book.
Hi, I'm Anne Pflug, the author of a new workbook published by Future Horizons called Finding Your Superpowers, a guide for people on the autism spectrum and their allies. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about the book, who would benefit from using it, and how to use the workbook contents over the course of your lifetime. As a young autistic adult told me the other day, it's very practical. Family members, caregivers, specialists, educators, employers, and community members seeking to actively be inclusive of neurodivergence can all apply the workbook. In short, for an autistic person, Finding Your Superpowers uses a fun workbook format to guide the reader through the process of finding your strengths and abilities, your individual superpowers, and then provides a roadmap for nurturing them in everyday life. The aim of the book is to increase the joy you experience in living. Let's talk about what's between the covers of Finding Your Superpowers. The workbook has 4 chapters and a resource guide at the end. The first part of the book orients the reader to the format of the workbook and its subject matter, including what superpowers are and are not. Chapter 2 takes the reader on a journey, following a detective and a scientist through the life cycle of an autistic person, providing a range of potential clues to strengths and abilities as they show up in a person's life over time. Chapter 3 leads the reader through the 8 senses, looking for clues and abilities of an autistic due to supercharged senses or other sensory differences from the typical. In Chapter 4, the reader constructs their own unique strengths and abilities map and learns how to nurture and develop their individual superpowers throughout their lifetime. At the end of the book, sources of information and a range of supplemental resources are brought together for the reader. Consider this guide as our family's gift to you, whether you are on the spectrum or an ally. We wish you more joy on your journey.
Wonderful. And Anne, we're going to get into many questions where you talk more about your book, but is there anything else that you wanted to add before we continue on?
I think one way to think about this book is to ask yourself whether you've ever thought in your own mind when working with kids or as a parent, boy, I wish this kid came with an instruction manual. So in a way, this is the book is an instruction manual that you can use at different points in your family's life or different points in your personal life if you're autistic, or as a professional or ally working with people on the spectrum to gain some insights that you can apply in your own work environment or your own family environment. So I found that to be kind of the main theme or things that people have told me about why they like to use the book.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And I have my own copy of it over here. I haven't read it cover to cover yet, but in starting to go through it, I find myself shifting into my parent lens a lot because it is so practical and so hands-on that there's a section where age by age, it tells you kind of some of the things to expect and what you can do and how to support. And so I really appreciate what I've read so far out of it. I also see that Kristen added to the chat that if you're in Washington State, you can borrow Anne's book from the SETC Lending Library. Thanks for putting that in there, Kristen. And there's a link to that as well. When we get to a question towards the end, we'll talk about where else you can find the book. These were some of the things that stood out to me while I watched the video. I love, again, that it's so practical, easy to read, easy to use, and easy to apply to your life. I love the focus on being strengths-based. I think that is the most important perspective, in my opinion. And then the aim of increasing the joy you experience in living. That stands out to me every time I listen to that video. Anything else that stood out to anyone here that you want to share before we move on? But you're all anxious to hear more from Anne, so we can go ahead and dive in. Anne shared with me before when we were putting these slides together that this page that came from my book here is the primary workbook outcome. So Anne, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what is this page?
Okay, kind of throughout the book, people have an opportunity to identify strengths and abilities, and they can write them or highlight them or record their thoughts as they work through the book. And then toward the end, not at the end, but toward the end, we ask the reader to kind of develop a map or a picture of their strengths and abilities. And this page helps people do that. So in addition to sensory strengths and abilities, there's also personal traits. There are special interests that the person on the spectrum may have that could help them in a number of ways in their life and learning. And then there are some practical abilities that come from their thinking style or skills that they have developed when they're focused on their special interests. So all those have their own individual work page, and then we bring them together in this skills and abilities map, which may change over time for people. And then we use that map in the last section of the book to talk about how to nurture strategies for nurturing those strengths and abilities at different points in people's lives, and also in making decisions and or trying to develop some practices as adults that use their strengths and abilities to their advantage, and also to increase the joy and comfort that they feel about their own lives.
I love that. And I think for me, it highlights again how practical and helpful this book is, because you have right on there what page to refer back to. So then you're kind of collating all the information. There's one main page to go back to later when you're looking through all of that. And I mean, I really see this as this could be helpful for anybody, but with the autistic population, really, again, highlighting what makes their brain so cool and so special, and taking those special interests and those strengths and highlighting it in the strengths-based way. It's great. And Kristen added to the chat, it's on page 84. So if you have the book, make a note of that page. Okay, so now we're going to kind of get to know Anne. I have a series of questions picked out to ask her, but I really, again, want this to be somewhat informal and collaborative. So I'm actually going to stop the screen share, and I'll put the questions in the chat for you as well, in case you'd like to see what it is if you missed what I asked her and want to go back. But this way, it can be just a little bit more informal. So our first question for you, Anne, what's your personal experience with autism? I know you shared a little bit about it before, but if you could elaborate for us.
Okay. I myself am not autistic.
However, I am one of the people throughout my life with my family who wished I had an instruction manual. It would have been extremely helpful. Some of the lessons you learn with you and your family are painful, and some of them are difficult to navigate. So having an instruction manual, so to speak, that you can use and build from. I'm hoping that people will be able to build from this, using a mindset that's very different than the medical model that autism typically is approached through, is the primary thing that I've kind of developed over my life experience in working with and within the systems that we have, and also with my family, trying to translate from the neurodivergent point of view to the typical point of view, and vice versa. My family gifted me with 35 years of learning about that translation, and I certainly feel like I was able to use that along with my research skills to bring to others something they can build from, rather than starting a journey with limited knowledge. So my experience, besides being a parent and a family member and a translator, has been in my career, where I both used in the field and taught research methods. So I was able to use those in putting together the information that's in the book. So I guess those are the important things that I feel like I bring to the table, and how I interact with autism, or have in the past.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think one of the things that is unique about your book in my mind is that there is so much research and evidence, and it's cited in there, and you can look back at the sources, but yet it still remains really practical and easy to use. So whether you're wearing your parent hat or your provider hat, you can find a use for it, throughout either of those lenses. And I really like how you talk about being a translator. I find that I am that person for my child as well. And that kind of speaks to the terminology we refer to sometimes as the double empathy problem, where neurodivergent or autistic people understand each other really well. The majority neurotypical people understand themselves really well, but like the understanding of the two different groups is really challenging. So I think, especially being a parent, but also an educator who works with the population, you do become a translator in some sense. So I love that you took the work, or some of the work, out of that and put it in this really easy to use format. Our next question for you is, why were you motivated to write this book? And we know that it focuses on autism, but is there something else in addition to that it focuses on?
Um, I've talked already about the instruction manual quality of it. and that's probably the major motivator. In addition to that, it was kind of, for me personally, putting it all down in one place and interacting with the people that I got to meet, the content experts and the young adults that were part of my reader group, well, young adults and other adults that were part of my reader group, who all are autistic. It gave me a chance to interact with all those people in a unique and in some cases fun way. I heard some really sad and challenging stories to hear from those that were interviewed. And then I got my reader group really gave me an education about autistic culture and kind of kept me on a path that they could relate to and felt comfortable with. And taking out some of the implicit bias that's common in the systems that we all get to interact with, that got unconsciously reflected in the early stages of the book by me. So those were motivating both through the process and at the beginning, putting the book together.
That just really speaks to how so much of our journey is this consistent learning and unlearning, right? Like as we learn more about something and then meet people with lived experience, our learning shifts sometimes to capture the experiences of others. And I really appreciate that. And that you were so reflective and making those changes in the book too. That's really great. What do you hope that readers take away from this book?
Oh, there's a couple things. I think the mindset that is more positive and nurturing and accepting is a really important takeaway. It's much different than the medical model that's inherent in a lot of the systems that families and autistics interact with right now. And just that, the different mindset approach to interacting with autistic people and thinking about, or I guess a foundation for thinking about new or different ways of approaching your work in a classroom or professional situation, or even how your family interacts with each other. So I think the mindset is a really important takeaway. I think another really important takeaway is that nurturing strengths and abilities starts on day one and continues all the way through a person's lifetime. A neurotypical person gets more opportunities to try out novice learning and make mistakes than a neurodivergent person who gets feedback right away from all kinds of systems about things that are wrong or need to be fixed, or the way they see the world maybe isn't the way they should see the world. So that kind of trying to change that environment to give a little more grace and respect for folks that have to navigate two separate worlds, the neurotypical and the atypical. It's kind of like being a person whose original language or first language is not English. There's a lot of things that you have to navigate through to be able to function in the world as many of us being neurotypical know it. So I think that's another takeaway, that I'm hoping that people gain the ability to use that perspective in their work and invent new and even better ways for working with the autistic clients and or family members in their own life.
Oh my gosh, so much of what you said I relate to and want to connect with. I think when you talked about having to switch between, it made me think as an SLP, code switching, right? Like switching between two languages, but we're putting that burden on the neurodivergent person, and that's why learning about the double empathy problem, where that people who are neurodivergent understand their own group, and maybe we as neuromajority should take some of that responsibility off of them and start to code switch with them. So that was one thing that stuck out to me. And then I was also thinking about what you said about how the burden starts so young with some of our kids, and just in ways that people, I think, don't even always realize that they are potentially hurting or harming someone else. So, for example, I was thinking about my own kiddo who has a little stuffed animal like a lovey, and they like to take it around with them, and has continued doing this to an older age than is what you would consider typical. And I think that is a source of comfort for them and brings them joy. And they also have this great imagination, where that's playing into all of it. And other people have said things like, why are you carrying that stuffed animal around still? And, putting these like negative connotations on what they're doing. But my kiddo knows and has known from an early age what brings them comfort and happiness and joy and what is true to them. And I just love that and appreciate that. And I hope that they continue to do that if that, brings them happiness. I have a question from you that isn't on the list that I gave you ahead of time. So hopefully that's okay. But I was just wondering, as you were talking about, all the medical model and some of the ableist language that's out there, because your book is so research based, how did you, as an author and a translator, take the research and filter through some of which is maybe ableist or skews towards that medical model, and how did you translate it to become strengths based?
It was difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the part that I had the hardest time with was the chapter in the book that goes through developmental stages, because most of the language is I am not comfortable with, and doesn't really fit this alternative model. So I even went to the extent of talking to some of the content experts about, had they ever thought about expressing it this way, or what about that, to see if I could get them to translate some of it for me, that would help me learn how to make a difference in some of the language that is in probably more than half of the research information that I went through. I'm sure I missed some things. I'm sure there's others could build on what is in the book now, and I hope will do that. Some of the folks, especially the content experts that I talked to, I deliberately picked people who seemed to be doing research that was more based in a different mindset to start with, and then try to extend beyond that a little bit in both the interviews and in asking them for other researchers or research that they knew about that was down kind of an alternative path. I ended up going back and forth several times because you get sucked into this whole in the medical model that's really hard to get out of.
Absolutely, it is. And I think one that shows us that we need more autistic researchers doing the research.
Oh, absolutely.
And I love that you leaned on people's lived experiences through your interviews and the content experts that you work with. I think that's the way to do it. Is that where most of the information came from that's in your workbook? Did it come from research filtered through content experts or from somewhere else?
There were a lot of family member interviews, and there were a lot of adult autistics interviews. So I'd say more than a third came from that. There's places in the book where I I quote the responses of some of the folks where they're particularly relevant to that part of the book. And that was my favorite part of the book to both write and also kind of as a guide to create the tone that I wanted to create. So I'd say about a third came from that, a third came from the research, and a third came from like content experts and a mix of content experts and lived experience, kind of guiding what I was asking and what seemed to me to be the kind of information people would want in an instruction manual for your kid. Yeah.
I like that. I think that's a nice mix of so many different perspectives that it really gives a well-rounded story. And I do like all of those, the mentions of the lived experiences and the quotes that you have in the book, because I feel like, although for me as a mom, they don't necessarily relate exactly to my experience, but I can see students I've worked with, or I can see related experiences in autistic children and young adults that I know as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a comment in the chat that says, love how the growth mindset really shines through in chapter 3, finding your superpower one sense at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your favorite part of the book? Do you have a favorite part?
One of, as I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite parts are the quotes from people's real lives. That was both, and sometimes those interviews were really hard to get through. They were pretty painful. And I at times asked myself a lot of questions because of that pain, which is in most families and autistics life experience. So kept me on track and tried to balance the kind of Pollyanna aspect of thinking about superpowers that a lot of people reacted to, and the reality of real skills and abilities that autistics bring to the world. So that kind of grounding is one of my favorite parts of the book, just because of the process. Another favorite part for me was learning about autistic culture, which I really knew zero about when I started. So kind of getting little clues about that as I started through the book, and then the reader group, who were all autistic adults, sometimes very in my face, introducing me to different aspects of autistic culture. And that part for me was really exciting. I enjoyed hearing about how autistic people together were growing kind of both a support and friend and perspective, joint or aggregate perspective that is strong and has an ability to grow over time. And I really appreciated that.
I'm curious if there's anything that you're willing to share that you learned about autistic culture.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting is that autistic culture takes place, or connections take place mostly online. So getting to have little glimpses of that by being referred to both websites and groups online was both interesting and eye-opening. I I wondered about all of the concern that many parents have about allowing their kids to be online and talking with people, kind of from a safety and won't my kiddo get taken advantage of perspective, versus being able to connect with other autistics and share a language and understanding that can't really be shared with neurotypical. So that was really an interesting part of building the book for me.
There's a question in the chat. Is there a link to an online group you would recommend?
Yes, it's not adult link. There are several other groups that you or websites online that are in the book for younger folks, but for adults, Neuroclastic is a website that I particularly appreciate. Reading the perspectives and the kind of no holes barred communication on issues that are important to people who are autistic.
That's wonderful. I'm putting the link to the chat to Neuroclastic here. I also wanted to mention that one way that I personally have really found myself a nice way to dive, or I guess dip my toe into autistic culture too, is to follow autistic adults on social media. And I started out just following a few of kind of like big name people. And then as the algorithms go, the more I watch, the more were kind of fed to me. And I started following more and more people. And I just find it fascinating because sometimes they are sharing about their own autistic experience, but sometimes they're just sharing about whatever. But because they are autistic, they share about it in an autistic way. And it's fabulous.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's something that I would highly recommend people do as well.
So I should probably also mention a podcast series called Autistic Culture. And it's hosted by and produced by a team of autistic people. And it's very well developed at this point. I think there's 130 or so episodes. And they have begun through the process of doing the podcast of defining some key characteristics of autistic culture. I think the latest episode is actually the 10 pillars of autistic culture. And it's very interesting.
That's wonderful. I'm an avid podcaster, so I just wrote that down. I put the link in the chat, and I'm definitely going to check it out. And just another little helpful hint for any parents out there, especially parents of maybe like tweens or late school age kids. If I know for me as a parent, I try not to go on social media in front of my kids, but if I am strategic about it. And so I often will be looking at social media accounts of some of these adult autistic people. And so then when my kiddo comes over and puts their head, what are you looking at? Show me what you're watching. It's often content that they might relate to and connect with and find really interesting. So just a little helpful hint for any parents.
That's a great idea.
How would you say that I, for example, or someone in this group would use the workbook with either our own children or students or clients or other family members?
Well, I'm going to start answering this question by kind of a cute story I was told. I have a friend who's in her 30s, I guess, and she is in the process of blending her family with 2 kids on the spectrum with another family that has 3 kids with 1 kid on the spectrum. So as you can imagine, this is a pretty complex thing to do. And we've been kind of chatting back and forth on how things are going. And their family has used the book for almost 2 years now. She was an early reader. And her 12-year-old has decided that her 12-year-old, who is not on the spectrum, has decided that anytime something happens among the kids in their family that she doesn't understand, she goes and grabs the book, shuts herself in her room, and reads until she can find something that she can relate to what's going on in the family. So I thought that was particularly heartwarming, both to hear as the author, but also in general. And I appreciate that use of the book with families. For people who have clients who are on the spectrum or are teaching in a classroom or are program administrators, I think some of the best uses of the book were not what I expected when I wrote it. So I've had groups use it for a group read, and then have a conversation about it in school districts or even with book clubs or professional organizations. And that was not a use of the book that I'd anticipated. It has some direct uses, obviously, in classrooms where you are working with students that you want to help through the process of identifying some of their strengths and abilities. It's useful when you're trying to do IEPs and you want to have a section of your IEP that identifies and then has some strategies for growing strengths and abilities, as well as dealing with deficits. I hate that word, but on the majority of the IEP document. It's also really useful for transition programs where you're trying to figure out what in high school and or college you would want to pursue as an autistic person or as an ally who's trying to help them work through the process of transition. So it has some very practical steps to take and some methods to get there.
Absolutely. I just keep going back to page 84, your strengths and abilities map. And I'm just thinking, I'm a speech pathologist, but if I were a classroom teacher, you could use this page with all of your students and think about like all the insightful information that you could get about all of your students. And then, not just if I'm thinking about writing the IEP, not even just thinking about the strengths section of the IEP, but embedding these interests and character traits and strengths and thinking styles and everything from this page into all of the sections of the IEP, and then really thinking about how do we write goals that align with their special interests and their strengths and their learning styles and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So at SETC, we support families and professionals with assistive and accessible technologies. And so I'm wondering, in your view, how can assistive technology empower autistic individuals to discover and use their unique strengths?
So I gave a little bit of thought to this question because I haven't been asked it directly like this before. One of the struggles that I had in writing the book was trying to approach such a wide range of spectrum individuals in one book. And I pursued, sometimes with great difficulty, including information and strategies for those who are non-speakers on the spectrum. And I think one of the key ways that assistive technology is so important is to tap into and help a non-speaking autistic person express themselves. There are a lot of ways to do that these days, and I don't pretend to be an expert on assistive technologies, but I think if you were to focus on one place that would add incredible value for autistic people's lives, it would be on helping with communication. So much grows out of that. One of the reasons I like the Neuroclastic website is they have an entire section of the website dedicated to non-speakers who are communicating with each other through the website, different parts of the website. So I think that if I was to pick one, that would be it. Beyond that, there's so much, since so much of autistic culture is developed and takes place online, helping people both in the family situation and as students have access to some of the ways to include themselves in autistic culture, kind of recognize it and use all the wide variety of apps and information on how to develop a special interest or pursue a special interest. There's just a huge range of things that assistive technology can help with. Some are more difficult and some are easier to use. Both as resources vary from district to district and as knowledge varies from district to district.
And that's the perfect time for a little plug. If you are working for a district that would like some additional support with assistive technology, we can help you out with that at SETC. But Anne, you're really speaking my language when you talk about AT for non-speaking students. That's my passion and what brought me into the field of assistive technology. And, I just have to emphasize that point because communication is a human right, and we all deserve to have access to it in whatever way, shape, or form that may be. So thank you for saying that. Last question that I have for you: who buys Finding Your Superpowers?
An unbelievably wider range of people than I expected. So lots of members and everything from grandparents to sisters and brothers and obviously parents, aunts, uncles, you name it. A lot of family members wanting to know how to communicate with and support and engage with family members who are on the spectrum in a respectful way. So a pretty wide range of folks there. Teachers in special ed and in regular education. Allied professions, which is getting larger and larger over time. Buy the book, both to learn more about autism in general, but also to get ideas for working with clients, which I find to be very exciting and want to support in any way I can. And then literally in classrooms with students and or in programs with program participants. People are buying the book. So it's a pretty wide range.
That also speaks to the wide range of folks we had registered for this session too. I think there are just a lot of people who could benefit from reading this book, including autistic folks themselves. At this point, we have a little bit less than 10 minutes left, so I just wanted to open it up and see if anyone else has some questions for Anne before we wrap up for today. Give it another minute to see if anyone's typing anything in the chat.
Furiously typing. Yeah.
Yes. Here's a question for you. What other PD courses might you suggest? So what other professional development courses?
That kind of reflects a different mindset. Yeah. I'm afraid I'm not a good person to answer that question exactly. The University of Washington Autism Center and a lot of the autism centers throughout the country now are including professional development in their offerings to the general public. University of Washington in particular has quite a number of professional development sequences that professionals can take. I know that the Autism Culture podcast developers or hosts have themselves developed some professional development like online stuff that you can do. And there may actually be some professional development credit available for some of it. One of the hosts is a psychiatrist who is on the spectrum himself, and he's developed some diagnosis and clinical methods, I guess that's what I'd call it, for clinicians. So I think that one actually has some credit associated with it. There may be other people in this webinar who would have some ideas about professional development options as well that I wouldn't know about. They might want to add them to the chat or raise their hand and let others in on it.
Absolutely. I see that Kristen put in the chat that SETC will be doing a book study on neurodiversity affirming schools, transforming practices so all students feel accepted and supported. And that will be coming next summer, so about a year from now, but the book is out already.
I was going to say you could register early for it and we can send you the book early so you can dive in.
Yep, absolutely. And there's actually an accompanying podcast that goes with that book as well. There was another question in the chat for you, Anne. It says, what about the use of AI in addressing student needs?
Oh my. I think the sky's the limit, may be a way to think about AI. I don't know, that plays with my personal brain a lot. So AI, it has so much potential for helping, particularly again with communication, that it's like a whole new world available to a lot of people that I think we haven't even begun to tap. So it would be great to be able to enable students to use AI in ways that work for them and are safe. And to me, that would be the focus of the use of AI in the student environment, which I know many of you are in. So somebody needs to help develop some curriculum that would address that. I think that would be a very important contribution right about now.
Thank you for that. I know we could do an entire webinar and multiple series of webinars on AI, and SETC does have some too, if people are interested in learning more. There are some links in the chat where people are adding different courses potentially that you might be interested in attending and learning more about autism. As we wrap up the last couple minutes, just wondering if anyone else has any final questions for Anne. I guess. Oh, I see Pam has her hand. Was that applause? I think it's applause.
Oh,
It looked like a hand. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Anne, where should people go to buy your book if people are interested in buying?
uh, the book is the book is generally available, so you can get it at any retailer pretty much. It's published by Future Horizons, which is the largest disability publisher in the world. And so you can go directly to their website. You can also buy it directly from me. I get a little bit more money that way. And my contact information is been added to the chat, I think, by Adam. If your local bookstore or doesn't have it and you'd like to see them carry it, you can easily ask them to do that. I know that's been a route that people who've wanted to do group reads have used.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kristen also added in the chat a parent event, a flyer to a parent event that's on May 31st in the Bellevue area featuring resources for students with disabilities. So go ahead and check that out. Sue just added the link to Amazon where you can purchase the book if you're interested. As was mentioned earlier, we also have a copy available through SETC. If you're in Washington State, you can borrow it from our lending library. Adam added Anne's contact information one more time, so it's in the chat in multiple places. But I just wanted to thank you, Anne, for joining us today, and thank you all for listening to Anne share about her new book, Finding Your Superpowers.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Anne. Can't wait to dive into it more.
That's great, Kristen.